I'm gonna start talking about 7 Years' War. So we know that that was all because everyone has these different imperial goals, and they all want the New World. So we have the British, we have French, we have Spain, and they all want America. But British kind of fought for the Americans, and we know that after the 7 Years' War, they had a lot of debt after it. So my question to you guys is, do you think it was fair that the British taxed the Americans, even though they didn't really have a choice? Like, the Americans couldn't really establish their own army to support themselves. Do you think it was fair for the British to just instantly give them all these taxes and ask for them to pay for it?
No.
I would say that the act of taxing them possibly would have been fair if they would have been represented in the government. Because like the state, like the slogan goes, no taxation without representation. So I think if the people who were creating these laws, the high aristocrats of England, in Parliament, that if they would have allowed Americans into Parliament, I think that the Americans would have received it better. But like, they feel like this tiny nation is making all the decisions for them and they have no representation.
And they're not even in the Americans with them. They're just making decisions from across the nation.
Also too, because like
Hey, I was gonna say across the ocean. Sorry, you go.
the colonies are like practically, they're still like a part of Britain, so it's almost like them taxing themselves. Then there's no.
That's true. But the upper class doesn't have to pay for it, right?
No,
The
they don't
ones
tax.
that-
They don't tax individual people. They tax goods that come in. Goods that people
Yeah,
need.
like tea and sugar.
What
And
about-
And paper
Yes,
and
we have the
lead.
Sugar Act.
What about not taxing, but like making colonists have
Right.
That's
British
like almost the
like
same
house
thing.
them? Yeah.
Because they're spending their money to support Britain,
I just think
or
it's
the British.
Where else would they stay?
Well,
But why would they have to pay for them?
They didn't have
They didn't have hotels.
But I feel like it's kind of rude to force people into
I mean,
your
yeah, I
home.
think it's
That's
weird.
why they got so mad.
But then the British might justify it as, well, we're protecting you, so you should at least let us stay in your homes.
But they're spending their money though, like their own, to like
Yeah.
quarter these people.
Is
But
it-
like,
Is
if
it-
they're really doing that much protecting, then like, why are they staying in the house?
Yeah, I think I could see them from like two different perspectives.
I mean, it's interesting in the Constitution they say that no soldiers, I believe not even at a time of war, are allowed to be quartered in one person. Like the government can't order that.
That's because.
That's a direct
of-
result of the
yeah.
quartering. Yeah. Yep.
Sorry.
Let's
So-
talk about the other acts.
So okay, we're just talking about that.
Yeah, we
Well,
should
this
talk
all-
Who's got this then?
I have a good question brewing in my head.
This all came from mercantilism.
Oh, I didn't know that was gonna be like part of this
No,
unit too.
because-
The colonists, and they didn't like mercantilism because they felt that the British were using mercantilism to exploit them.
Yes. Perfect.
So they retaliated with
The.
all these different
Such as
rebellions.
the Boston
Massacre.
Massacre.
Yes, alright, go.
Hey, Bob.
It's me.
The Boston Massacre, which was like,
What happened?
okay, well, I thought that it was like no one knows who did the first shot, but in the
Same.
textbook it said
Isn't that
the
Lexington?
British did
Yeah,
the
that's
first shot.
Lexington.
I thought
No, see, that was the same.
Lexington was a shot heard around the world.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the shot.
but
The shot heard.
Wasn't
but, like,
Boston Massacre, it was like, you don't know which side it came from,
They
and
didn't
it was the British automatically shot into the crowd.
The Americans. They didn't. They know the Americans were throwing snow and dirt at them.
They do know that.
Yeah, they know
They
that,
didn't
but they
know
didn't have
what
guns.
explicitly
They were just
happened.
throwing snow and ice balls at them.
Exactly. Well, I think that's what you mean by shot, right? That's what
No, I mean like
Oh.
shot.
Like actually shot?
Like,
I think you're thinking.
Oh,
I think you're
I thought it
thinking.
was just them.
I think you're thinking of
like,
Lexington.
Yeah.
College.
Lexington is
Okay.
where they shot and had 300 casualties. So
Wait, what was the cause of the Boston Massacre?
These
What-
kids
it
were
was just
throwing
like,
snow.
yeah, it was like everything was
Teenagers.
heightened.
Yeah, it was
Just
just riot.
Because.
Well,
Just-
technically
They were protesting
more
the tax.
people
Weren't they
were-
also
yeah.
protesting like the heavy like presence of
British.
British soldiers,
Yeah.
Oh, so they were protesting the.
So like throwing snowballs, like get out of here, get out of here. Like one of them just got scared. One of the British soldiers got like a little jumpy. And he just like fired.
Yeah, you just fired into a crowd.
Wait. Who is the Stamp Act? Because I think that this declaratory act is interesting, because after the Stamp Act was repealed, even though it was like repealed, this act was still made to give, England blind rule over the colonies. Like, I don't know, I guess Not as obvious?
No, like,
I think
a
it-
blind
full-
rule, I mean like, like
all of.
They
like,
control
yeah,
the
mass
colony's
law,
rules,
yeah.
they can veto any rules the colony make. They have
Complete control.
Yeah, complete.
But like, they don't have to pay the tax, but it's still complete control. I don't know, Britain was just, I don't know what was going through their little head, like, it was like the colonists were their minions. I don't know why they thought it would work, you know? Do you guys like, think they thought it would work? I don't know.
Well, it kinda did work.
No, but then they fought back and
Yes,
they
but they got,
lost.
the
Britain
whole
lost.
reason why they taxed them was to pay their war debt, and they did that with the taxes.
But then they had more war debt from the American Revolution, right?
Okay, yeah, you can argue that.
Can I make a connection between Britain having blind rule to
Yes.
proclamation of 1763 when London issued the proclamation to prohibit settlement in areas beyond the Appalachians?
That's 63.
And I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure,
1763.
the colonists completely disregarded that and still settled past that anyway.
Yeah, what was the point of that again?
Just
Cause there was like Native American
Yeah.
tribes to hopefully stop conflicts between them, I wanna say.
Wait, was that as a result of the 7 Years War and the French and Indian War? Like, that was after that, or was it before?
Because they
All
had
of this
gotten
is
land.
after 7 Years War.
Yeah.
Oh.
They didn't wanna, they wanted they thought the Indians had helped them a lot, and they thought some Indians had, fought against them, so they wanted to make, they realized they had to be friends with all the Indians just in case another conflict came up, so we're like, oh, we'll just stop our expansion here, improve relations. So that's why a lot of the Indians served on the side of the British during the war, because they knew the Americans, if they won, they would expand out. So, one card that I had was Republican, motherhood, so I just wanted to talk about what do you think women's empowerment wasn't too advanced at this time, but how did the idea of Republican motherhood and the Daughters of Liberty and all these groups and all the ways that women helped, how did it help empower women into the next, into the coming centuries?
Well, it kind of gave, it was a switch of pace almost, because they never, had the power to.
Do anything?
Yeah,
It was
now
like the
they kinda
first
have like a
step.
purpose and like a need.
And also to, well, no, never mind. But they were also serving as almost alongside men in the.
Some of them,
when they were
In the
fighting.
war,
some,
right.
some of them disguise themselves as men, they
Right,
shave
I
their hair.
remember
Mulan. Except this is America, but still. The Mulans of
And not a
America.
Disney movie, but still.
But, no, it's still pretty bad, but the ones, I guess the ones that went on the war, with the men on the war from location to location, took up for them and stuff, I guess it was giving them more of a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's still their purpose was to serve men.
Yeah.
Which is kinda okay, but
But at least it was for
It was a
political
s-
reasons.
yeah, a step in the right direction for sure.
I think,
Small steps.
did you mention Daughters of Liberty?
Yes.
They
I was thinking that.
were most important because they were supposed to enforce non-importation, which was made so that Americans didn't have to import British goods, which was an act of unionism among the colonies, so that they could lessen their independence on Britain.
I think them boycotting those British products had a big overall impact on the boycott as well as the revolution in general, because the boycott was so crucial in the rebellion. And they're also the ones when supplies became short and stuff like that in the revolution, when they couldn't find enough material to export or anything. The women found ways to create clothing out of items that weren't received from the British.
Yeah.
Oh, that. The whole thing where they boycotted Britain goods.
Yeah,
The association, is that a flashcard? Does anybody have that?
Ooh.
They
No, but
inspired that
good
idea
reference.
after the First Continental Congress of 1774 to discuss their grievances, and that led to all of this boycotting. Wow. Okay, anybody got something that connects to this?
The second Continental Congress, which we kinda skip ahead to 1775.
Oh.
But 1775. But what happened at the Second Continental Congress is George Washington was selected to lead the Continental Army,
Oh, wait.
which can then tie into
The Declaration of Independence is
Or the Battle
1776.
of Trenton that was a victory for George Washington. He executed a surprise attack on the sleeping Hessians
Hessians.
They were
Hessians.
Hessians.
at Trenton, and it was a pivotal battle in the colonists, or for the colonists, and it helped like them strive for independence. It's pretty sick. Sorry.
Just to go back to the Second Continental Congress, this was where the Olive Branch Petition became a thing, and the colonists were professing their loyalty to Britain, and I think it was kind of a fake because they're not loyal at all, they're trying to gain their independence, but the British king declined and he was like, I think he suspected something, so this was where the American colonists, or colonies, were kind of forced to say, okay, should we give in to Britain and just allow them to take over, or is this where we fight hard for our independence?
Is this the olive branch?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the colonists, they were just kind of like unsure of themselves.
Yeah.
They had like started this war and they're like, oh, like, if we can just talk about things, like, I think we'd like to end it, because they weren't really sure what I mean, they knew what they were doing, but they were really, I think they were like a little timid to break away from the crown, so they
Well,
didn't know
there's,
for
like,
so long.
There was no like future for them, kind of. So
Yeah.
it's like
It was a blurry idea of the
Yeah.
future.
it was uncertain.
Speaking of the future, wait, am I allowed to do this? Okay, we're doing this. The Treaty of Paris that ended this whole mess. I wanted to talk about the treatment of the loyalists, because I think it's kind of funny that there were people like living in America with all the people who were rebelling and stuff who still agreed with the British. And I think it was funny how they like executed them and everything. It's like having two political parties.
Wait, what?
Well, they didn't.
Okay, alright.
Well, it's so intense. They drove them out of America essentially, didn't they? They
Yeah.
wanted to like move back.
Yeah,
The loyalists
a lot of them,
versus
they
the,
drove a lot of them out.
The other ones. What are the other ones? The Whigs.
Patriots.
Yeah, Patriots. No, it's like having two different political parties, but
Yeah.
one actually drives out the other. I don't know.
Kind of like the Whigs and the Tories at the same time.
Well, it's not what they're
Are
called.
those the
It's
same
the
thing?
same name, it's like casual
Just-
version.
No, loyalists and patriots is different from Whigs and Tories.
I thought Whigs and Tories were just like a nickname for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Alright, let's-
Alright, so
No.
the Whigs and the Whigs and Tories were two political parties in England, like Republican and Democrat. The Whigs were the people who preferred constitutional monarchy. So they were the ones who wrote those articles before the war opposing the Tory rule. The Tories, they had that king kind of absolute power.
But wasn't it like most patriots were Whigs? and
Yes,
most-
they weren't like in, the Whig was
No,
just
wait a
parties,
minute,
was a
wait.
party who was in England. But they
No,
identified with the
I have in
cause.
parentheses, loyalists, parentheses, Tories, and patriots, parentheses, Whigs, but anyway.
They identified with that like ideology, the each
Yeah.
group's ideology. It's like the
Yeah, so I
Patriots
guess that's
identified
why-
with the
yeah.
Whig ideology.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I think
yeah.
the Patriots were kind of the equivalent of Whigs because the radical Whigs were encouraging American citizens to be, to like take their liberty from Britain.
Oh, Aiden, do you have any?
Perfect. Thank
Yes,
you.
okay, do you have any
Battle of Bunker
questions?
Hill.
Oh, you Bunker Hill, okay.
Alright, it was just like, one of the questions was why is a big confidence booster. I think it just showed how they could take down like the redcoats and all that, like, it was at the start of the American Revolution, so if anyone has another battle that they can link it to.
Wait, can I just real quick before you talk about that?
Okay.
Cause this was like a precursor for the revolution, the Committee of Correspondence in 1772, which was created by Samuel Adams to like maintain communication during the revolution. So that was.
No, keep going.
Yeah, so just basically like, that was like
I think
a
it was
good resource to
key,
have
like,
during,
The war.
Bunker Hill and what
Well,
you
also
were about to
too,
say.
we were like with the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Bunker Hill, we were kind of starting to like win more battles because England and Spain were also in conflict, so that was weakening like England's army, I guess, because they had to pay attention to fighting the colonists and
Yeah,
fighting.
like distracted.
In
Yeah.
Ireland too,
This was
right?
Well,
called King George's War.
once we won those battles, then the French
Yeah.
decided
Decided
they
to
want to join the
help
war.
Canada.
And like personally, I don't think we could have beat them without the French. French, but we kept it alive for 2 years. Then the French see, they're like, oh wow, these colonists, they're actually taking it to the king. We had just lost. We need a chance to get back at the king, and they just
It was also,
What
wasn't
was
it
the
like,
battle that got
Saratoga.
Saratoga.
was it
Yeah.
20?
The turning point.
Cause wasn't France also trying to like get away from their monarchy?
No, that was 20 years
They
later.
just wanted fur
It was
trade.
inspired by the American
Okay,
Revolution.
okay.
Come on.
So
No, Britain and France.
I want to shift gears a little bit to the actual writing of the Constitution in chapter 9. And I see Aiden's got the Great Compromise here, and I just wanted to talk about maybe the Great Compromise and when you guys were reading, what did you think about the anti-federalists versus the federalists? I know it was a difficulty balancing the power of the central government to the individual rights of states and the idea of republicanism. So what did you guys think about those debates between, if you were a colonist living in that time? To me, I thought that it would be very hard, to accept a central government. Not that it would be bad, but it would just be hard to trust. You know what I'm saying? Because you're so used to a king and stuff. I just think that it was very hard to balance that stuff. I don't know what you guys are thinking on that.
Yeah, and the anti-feds were worried that they were gonna take away the power of, citizens' opinions and, their contribution to government.
Yeah, because they just got over a war where they were fighting for their independence,
Yeah,
only
they don't
to
wanna
be
lose
put.
it.
Yeah.
Again.
I also think it's interesting how in the Great Compromise where they decided the House of Representatives and the Senate, I think it's interesting that we still use that today. There's been no more
Yeah.
disputes
It's
over it.
so weird that we still use
I think
a
it's
system from
it's all-
that long ago. I don't agree with that.
What, do you have a
Well-
better solution?
Yeah,
what would you
remake
prefer?
it.
Well, wasn't there a thing to where
Like, we're in
people who-
2019.
Well, wasn't it a thing where the people who even this might be wrong, but who wrote the Constitution were we should revise those every.
Yeah.
Well, they said we should be able to amend it, so they made laws in which it
And
can be amended.
amendments. Yeah,
The,
there's only how many
just-
amendments? Less
There's
than 30.
26.
Something, yeah.
yeah, I think there's about 30.
What's
Those
the
are
last
old
one?
too,
What's
aren't they
your
all really
favorite-
old?
What's your favorite amendment?
My favorite?
Mine's the 19th.
Dude, I don't know what the
What's the
amendment is.
19th?
Women's
Is-
right to vote.
Oh, ooh, I like that one, but there's also one about ending slavery, isn't that
Like the
15th?
22nd?
No,
No, that one's the
no,
third.
the
Well, the
17th,
13th, but the-
17th is the one that gave women the right to vote, and the 17th.
Cause I like that it was earlier.
It was 19th.
No, it's the 19th, but I like that it was earlier.
That.
So the First Amendment's the Bill of Rights.
Or the first 10.
The first 10
Yeah.
amendments of
I'm
Bill of
sorry,
Rights.
first. Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
But I like how slavery was only 13 and it wasn't 20 something.
I mean-
I mean,
But
yeah, it
still
still
bad.
should've been
It's
number
still
one.
very bad, but
Yeah.
You gotta go in.
I,
Kinda do actually.
I just think it's interesting how these people they came up with these really I mean, they had been in a revolution, but these were revolutionary ideas, having 3 branches of government, that's just a crazy, it's just crazy to think that they were that smart to come up with these systems of checks and balances at a time where there wasn't, I mean, they were essentially the first democracy, the creators of democracy. I think that's these were really smart people who were creating this constitution. I mean, they were flawed, and the document they made was flawed. I mean, you couldn't vote if you weren't a male in the land, and slaves weren't counted as people. But I think the way that they set up the Constitution was a way that slavery eventually could be eradicated. So I think they were very smart in that way.
Cause it was vague and it wasn't very specific. What's
Yes.
that term? What's that term? Colonial law versus
Oh yeah.
the other law, common law?
Yeah.
Civil law and common
Civ-
law.
Isn't it civic?
Well, yeah, civil law is the specific detail one, and common law is the one where it was short.
They allow room for it to be changed.
Okay, good job. End discussion because it's 3:05. Hey, Ms. Turkle.
Thanks, Ms. Turkle.
Happy Mr.
What if I told you